Hello, partnerships. They can make you or they can break you. What is so good about partnerships that it is something that you seriously want to consider to grow and scale your business? In today's episode of Strategy Talks, we're going to talk to Robin Waite, who's going to share with you a wonderful partnership he forged last year and all the results, all the things, the good things that happened. We're also, of course, going to talk about some cautionary tales and things maybe you should consider before you jump into any partnerships. This is Strategy Talks. If you're ready, we are ready to go.
Let's strategize together. Let's hear it from an expert. Join the conversation, it's informative and free. You and me, let's talk some strategy. Now here's your host, Dorien Morin-van.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dorien Morin-van, and we are back with another episode of Strategy Talks. If you're watching this live, want to welcome you. We welcome comments and questions. As always, let us know in the comments whether you're watching this live on YouTube, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn. If you're watching this on the replay, #replay in the comments will allow my guests and myself to see that you're watching the replay in case you have questions. And of course, if you're listening to Strategy Talks as a podcast, a special welcome to you as well. Without much further ado, I'm going to pull up onto the stage my guest for today, Robin Waite. How are you today, Robin?
I'm great, thank you, Dorien. I enjoyed your jingle. That's one of the best podcast jingles I've ever heard.
Thank you. My son wrote it and recorded it, sang it. And yeah, it's been with me since episode 7 of season 1. So absolutely love it. I did put a new video together this year, but yeah, absolutely. It's fun.
Yeah, good work. Good work. I'm going to have to work my game now, I think, for my podcast for sure.
Sure. Well, let me know if you need any help. So we're going to talk about the power of partnerships today. And I'm very excited because I wouldn't be where I am today in my business and what I've accomplished in growing and scaling without partners, right? And they could be all sorts of different partners. So before we jump into your experience, Robin, let's talk about some different kind of partnerships that people could create when we talk about partnerships in business. Can you have some different ways that we could partner with people, and what would that look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, though, just to kind of set the scene, they get partnerships wrong when they make it all about them. And I think it's really important to talk about the value of podcasts and how that sort of transaction works out. And I have a very simple equation, which is deliver 10 times the value you expect to get back. And any money that happens as a consequence of that is normally a byproduct of doing that job well done, just delivering, tons of value. But in terms of the different types of partnerships, there's the first and most simple one is probably where it's kind of a skill swap. So, I think as entrepreneurs, we tend to think that we can do absolutely everything within our business, and we don't let much go. But I'm a big fan of finding people in the room who are much smarter than I am at very specific things, and then where I can, I'll help support them by engaging them to do some work together. So that supplier, customer relationship is probably the first partnership, which is what most people would typically sort of look at when it comes to business. Yeah. Beyond that, then you can then look at more strategic sort of partnerships. So collaborations, for example, is a very good example where, again, no money has to exchange hands, but perhaps there's a slight overlap with audiences where you're doing something similar and it makes sense to expose other people to your audience so that they can benefit from it, your knowledge as well. And then you can go much deeper into it than that, where it becomes a lot more commercial. So that, for example, and this is something which I'm going to be talking a bit more about today, where you're leveraging other people's audiences in order to sort of grow your own audience. And those are actually, they sound like they should be really easy to do, but actually they're really hard in practice to pull off, and you've got to be incredibly patient. So those are the three major types of partnership.
That's great. Yeah. And I'm excited to explore that third way to do that because, when I started my show, I was petrified to be on camera alone. So my first thought was, hey, I'll partner with all my guests, right? I see all of you as partners. And over the years, the guests have really shown that they are true partners. The more I give them as far as assets, the more they share. The more they share with me to better my audience, and the more my audience grows. So that is a true partnership between my guests and myself. So I absolutely love that, that you started with that. So let's start with defining success in a partnership, right? Are there any key ingredients that you think are important to keep in mind when you start thinking about partnering with somebody?
Yeah, I think again, it's that notion of sort of give without take. Really, it's about delivering exceptional value to somebody. I do think, as a word of caution, there does have to be some balance in that relationship as well, because I know there are some times when you'd be putting everything into a partnership and it's not necessarily being met on the other side, and there is a point where laws of diminishing returns start to happen, and you just don't get that the results or outcome that necessarily you're looking for. And so at that point, I think if it's not being reciprocated, I think you've got to kind of politely sort of step back and then look at other strategic partnerships. But generally, as a rule, you want it to be fair, you want it to be even, you want all of the parties to benefit in some way from that relationship, remembering that everybody doesn't have to benefit at the same time. It might be slightly one-sided for a while, and then eventually the other person catches up and they do something on their side of the partnership. I think if it's perpetually that you're putting everything into that partnership and it's not being reciprocated, that's the point to stop.
Yeah, that's interesting because I used to tell my kids that they would be going, no fair. And I'm like, it's not equal, but it will be fair. Like it will, some kids needed more, and, you can liken that to business. Sometimes you give a little bit more to one partner, knowing that return on investment comes back maybe next year or next week or in 5 months. Right. So I love that you explained that. So when we go onto benefits, let's set the stage for what happened to you last year. You kind of telling me in the green room, you partner with somebody. And I'm going to let you tell the story, and then let's talk about the benefits that came out of that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of pressure as a coach or a speaker to, that you have to be out there, getting exposure for your personal brand. And you can follow the sort of the rule book, which is around sort of building marketing assets, writing books, guesting on podcasts, and all of those sorts of things. Doing social media, which I have views on, which Dorien, you'll have to stop me because I tend to rant a bit when we get onto like social media and things like that. But there's certain things you're expected to do basically to get clients as well, and to gain exposure. But I reached a point last year where I was kind of doing all of the things that all of the gurus and experts tell you to do, even the things which I might sometimes even advise my clients to do. And I wasn't getting the results or the exposure which I felt that I worked out actually in February, just gone now, February the 1st was 20 years ago, I registered my first limited company. So in 20 years in business, I have kind of relatively high expectations that this is where my career should be. And at the start of last year, I was like, right, I'm going to completely throw the rule book out the window. I'm going to stop doing marketing because I'm just putting all of this effort in, and it doesn't feel like it's necessarily being met with, the results which I'd expected. And started to just rethink how I was going about building my network, building my audience, how my approach to partnerships and things like that. And the first thing I noticed was that goes back to something I said right at the start, actually, that I've been quite selfish. Being very honest. I've been quite selfish about how I'd approach partnerships, and I kind of made it all about me. And I don't want people to think I'm some kind of like egomaniac here, just like, I just got it wrong. It was just a perception thing. I was just doing it wrong, thinking that I was going out so that I could win business back. And that attachment was the thing which had been holding me back. So the start of last year, I completely threw that out the window, decided, right, I'm just going to deliver value to the right people. If I can find the right partners and approach it with the right sort of, completely detached, the right attitude, as in to be detached would be the right attitude in order to be able to help other people. So I put up on my vision board at the start of last year, there was one guy I had in mind, this guy called Ali Abdal, which if people are into YouTube, he's the leading productivity expert on YouTube with something like approaching 6 million subscribers. And he launched this podcast a couple of years ago called Deep Dive. And just the traction that he got on it was phenomenal. I was like, right, I want to get onto Deep Dive. And I kind of knew him and a couple of people in his network. I've known about him for a couple of years, which kind of made it slightly easier. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I'm sure you don't want the whole, we can kind of dig into it, but I'll give the short version and then you can ask me the question.
Well, actually, I'm going to stop you for a second because you said something a minute ago that I think is important for people to realize. When you said, I decided to start giving value and not expect anything back. If you're watching this, listening, that is what you should be doing on social media at all times. Okay. Not just for a podcast you're preparing for or a partnership. When you deliver value over and over and over without expecting anything back, that's when people start following you. That's when you grow your community. And that's when you will be a trusted source. And that's how your business will scale. So thank you for making that point, Robin, because I think that is something that we get so caught up into our own being and strategy and listening to experts and coaches and all of that. But if we can just consistently deliver value in social media, that is also where that same principle will work. So, all right, you got on the show.
Well, look, it's about, so I think a lot of people, I did this. It was just, you focus so heavily on the top line, you forget about everything else, which actually like what are the values and the vision and the mission for the business and things like that. But that's probably something for another day anyway. So how I got on the show was quite interesting. So I put a picture of me, I photoshopped it, a picture of me and Ali on a podcast together. So that went on my vision board and I was like very hyper intentional. I was like, I'm getting on that podcast. And I was very specific about that. Because again, marketing to that point had been a little bit like, oh, I'll send a load of books out and I'll do a load of stuff and we'll hope that, cast the net out wide and hope that something comes back. But this time I was like, no, this is important to me. I want to go on that guy's podcast. And it was very much, I loved his team. I loved his ethic. I loved the vision for his business and I loved his ideas and things like that. So I was like, it really aligned with who I am. And I felt, well, let's make it work. But I got wind that they were recording, I think, season 6 and 7 at the start of the summer in 2023. And I reached out to some of his team who I'd met at a couple of events previously to that. So they knew who I was. And I said, listen, I know you were thinking about recording the next couple of seasons. Put me down, chalk me down as a super sub. If, because you're going to be doing 20 plus interviews. If somebody's ill, can't make it or whatever over the course of a couple of weeks, let me know. I'll get on the bus, train, whatever, drive down to London and I'll record. So on the Thursday in June, I got a call saying our guest on Tuesday's dropped out. Could you make it? And I was like, yeah, of course, no problem. Phone down. And my wife had to go up to Birmingham for work. I had childcare to take care of. I had 3 other podcasts booked in, which sounds awful because I was like going to basically had to can a load of stuff in order to make this work because I knew how epic it would be to get on there. Went down, got off the train at Paddington and I got pooped on by a pigeon.
Oh,
right?
no.
And I'm like, all on my head, my shoulder, everything. And I'm like, oh God, no, this is awful. And I don't know why, but that morning I packed 5 shirts. 5 spare shirts in my bag. I never do it, even when I'm going for interviews or things like that in the past. I thought, no, this is a big deal. It's on my vision board. I've got to do it. So I packed 5 shirts. And thankfully I went into the Hilton Hotel, washed myself down, changed my shirt, and then sort of went and did the interview. But I had no idea how big it was going to be. It was quite interesting. So I was very fortunate. I had lunch with the team and Ali before we recorded. And one of the guys there, I mean, they're all freelancers on his team. So they do video production and graphic design freelancing and things like that. And one of them said, oh, Rob, you know about pricing, don't you? Could we have a conversation about that over lunch? I said, yeah, sure. So I actually ended up doing a little mini coaching session with Tintin on his team. And about 5 minutes before we hit record on the podcast, Ali said, that thing you did with Tintin, could we do that on the podcast? So I was like, yeah, cool. And we ended up running he came up with 2 sort of made up scenarios for businesses that he wanted, that he was thinking about starting up along, side hustles. So I coached him through those. And it was brilliant. I think the episodes now had something like 175,000 downloads since it went live.
One episode,
1 2-hour chat with a YouTuber, right? So 175,000 views. It's generated over 1,500 leads, which I'm still getting several every day coming in. And I shipped, I like to give away copies of my book. Originally, we were going to just do like 15 signed copies to the first 15 people who applied, but literally the requests kept coming. And I was like, do you know what? The universe is telling me I just need to send these books out, without going too woo-woo. So I shipped 600 signed copies of the book as well in sort of 3 or 4 months. It was just bonkers. And it was just because we got on that recording and came from a place of value, basically. I'll coach him, and hopefully that'll inspire a few other people to start up businesses.
That's an amazing story. So what I like to hone into is preparation, right? Vision, preparation, and then the value that you gave when you weren't on the clock, so to speak. When you're having lunch, you're being kind to somebody on his staff, somebody on his team. You're doing that mini coaching session, and then he's like, wait, that would be brilliant. So I'm also assuming that the format of the podcast, for the 2-hour podcast, was a little bit different than he normally does, because you were going to have a conversation, not a coaching or training session. So standing out by doing something different, you kind of manifested this whole thing, which is wonderful. And you've kind of shown us what comes out of that. Now, I don't know if I've never heard this said in podcasting, but the outbound, inbound kind of thing. A lot of us think that in order to get on other people's podcasts, we have to have our own podcast, and it's very reciprocal. You did not go into it like that. You weren't going, I need him to be on my podcast, right? You just manifested, I want to be on his. Was there a strategy for that part? Like, did you ever consider asking him to come on yours? Did you ever consider other partners that you haven't reached out yet? Like, is this a process? I guess what I'm asking, is this a process that you can give a name and that you can duplicate moving forward?
Yeah, 100%. And so I had considered getting him onto my podcast, but you imagine a guy who's running a $6 million a year business with a team of 15. He's traveling all over the world. He's very hard to pin down for those sorts of things, right? So that one I've actually kept in my back pocket, and he will come on the podcast at some point in the future. But the process was the process again was a bit of trial and error. I'll be very honest. But I had a great lesson from another friend of mine. There's a guy called Simon Alexander-Ong who wrote a book called Energize. And I noticed that Simon kept on getting onto these amazing podcasts. He kept on having selfies with the likes of Stephen Bartlett and loads of, he got Simon Sinek to write a bit of praise and some of the foreword for his book. And he had these amazing relationships, which he was forging. So I'm friends with Simon. So I said, Simon, how do you keep doing this? How do you keep getting these selfies with all these amazing people? And he's like, I'm not going to tell you. It's like, it's really frustrating, right? But what he said, if you just watch what I do, you'll learn how to do it for yourself. So I was like, okay, so yeah, Simon Masterson, yes, well, yeah, right. I'll follow you. I'll just see what he does, and observed it. And this is how I got onto Ali's podcast, right? I observed Simon, and there was 3 things which I noticed. The first thing which I noticed was that, and it's very simple. So a lot of people, I think, are lulled into this thing with internet marketing or the internet. Global world domination at your fingertips. And so we hide behind screens and we don't really get out that much these days. And I think COVID also put pay to a lot of the in-person stuff. But I noticed that Simon kept on putting himself in the room with these people. He literally flew into LA when he knew that Simon Sinek was keynoting at a conference, and paid several $1,000s for the privilege of the flight and the tickets and the hotel and everything. And he got the VIP upgrade, literally just so that he could be in the room. He could stand next to Simon and have a photo taken with him, shake his hand and praise him for the work that he was doing. So that's the first thing. Get yourself in the room with the person that you want to do the partnership with, whatever it takes. And since January the 1st, 2023, when I changed my whole strategy around this is something which I now do as often. I mean, I live in the Cotswolds in the middle of the UK, which is like out in the sticks, right? So it's a bit of a jaunt, like to get down to London, regularly to kind of meet people. But if there's something if I want to meet somebody, I've got to get down there and do it. And it's as simple as that. So with Ali, I just kept putting myself in the room. He does lots of community events and things like that. So he's now speaking a lot more. He has a wonderful community built up through his through something called the Part-Time YouTuber Academy, which is a course which he's built. So I just did the course. I infiltrated his events. I went and met him and shook his hand and said thank you for the great work he's doing and various things like that. And over time, you just become familiar with people, so that helped.
Right.
The second thing was, and this I learned more so when in sort of the run up to get the team reaching out to me. I connected with all of his team, which at the time there's about sort of 12, 15 of them. And I'd follow their posts. I would comment on their things. I was making introductions. So I introduced a couple of guests for Deep Dive, Ali's podcast. I was just helpful, basically. And it's one of those things whereby you can choose to do 4,000 things 12 times and never master it, or you can do 12 things 4,000 times and create true mastery, but of course you get acknowledged and noticed for that. So with Ali, it was kind of like, well, I'll just be helpful to his team. I'll keep showing up in their world and be helpful and things like that. And I had a couple of calls with his team as well before it, and just helpful, basically. And then it was after that, the third and final thing in terms of making sure that partnership worked. So one was the value on the podcast as well. But I think here's where a lot of people get podcasting wrong, right? They show up on a podcast and they're like, hey, look at me, look how amazing I am, and look how great. And they don't actually necessarily give you all of the stuff, right? The formula. Okay. That's hopefully what I'm trying to do now is say, well, if you do these three things, if you get in the room, if you make sure you're helpful to the team, if you lead with value, and I'll talk about what value looks like when you're on the podcast as well. If you do those three things and you're intentional about the person that you want to do some work with, you'll get whatever you want out of it eventually. So patience is a massive part of this. It's probably been 2 years in total worth of nurturing the relationship to get that opportunity. But now I know that I can apply that to other podcast hosts, and I can apply it to other strategic partnerships that I'm looking to forge, and just play the long game. But probably I only need 10 or 12 good, solid strategic partnerships in order to have build a sustainable, funnel, if you like, because ultimately, there is a part of it, which that's what it's about.
Right.
So the third thing, Dorien, and then I'll stop rabbiting, but hopefully this is valuable. You need assets. So the people listening on the audio, they can't see this, but I'm pointing at my book, right?
Right.
I'm not going to do a shameless plug for that. It's not. But a lot of people, again, get onto podcasts. They don't quite give everything away in terms of like value. And then they're kind of like, oh, go and follow me on social. Go and watch, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Now, audience growth is great, but if you've got something that is going to potentially transform somebody's life, like a book or something of really great value that somebody can sign up to, and physical, it puts you in the top 1% of experts out there. And not many people realize this.
All right, can you say that again? I love this. Okay, this is like, okay, say that again. This is
if you have something physical, tangible, that you can actually send out to people after a podcast, they will never forget you. It puts you easily in the top 1% of podcasters out there. Guests and hosts, it doesn't matter. Because of the internet, we just got lazy and we're too afraid to spend money, right? On Ali's podcast, I could have just stopped at the 15 books and be done with it. And it'd have been like 30, 40, 50 pounds or something like that for the printing and postage. But the requests kept coming in and I thought, no, these people obviously saw value in the podcast. I want to follow that up and back it up with something. 600 books isn't cheap to produce and ship, right? Not least because of the time. I signed and packed every single one, and I marched it down to the post office to see Pauline there, who was very grateful for all the packages I was sending, via them. It meant a lot to me to be able to send out those books to people, because there was a lot of the countries where I was sending them to, and this is a broad generalization. I probably shouldn't make sweeping statements like this. They couldn't afford coaching. They couldn't afford to spend money on an expensive course or something like that. So I knew for them, receiving a business book from little old Robin in the UK probably meant a heck of a lot to them. And it's something I would have appreciated, I know, when I was starting up in business as well. So I'll suck the cost up to have to get the warm fuzzies on behalf of, a few hundred or a few thousand people.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So for those of you watching, those of you listening to this podcast, Strategy Talks, Robin has just delivered immense value. So go write that book, go create that course, have something tangible. You probably already are guesting on podcasts like me or hosting a podcast like me if you're watching this or listening to this. So create something tangible that you can then send out to further nurture that relationship. So Robin, what's in the future? We've got just a few minutes left. What's in the future for you? Where are you going to be? Where can people get in the room with you when they want to meet you and invite
Dorien,
you to
they
their
can meet
podcast?
both of us. They can meet both of us, can't they? Because we're speaking at Tube Fest in May, up in Birmingham. I can't remember what the exact date is, but I'm very excited.
May
about
23rd on a Thursday.
May 23rd. So definitely for that. I'm not speaking at it, but there's a fantastic marketing event here in the UK as well, actually, and they get a lot of people fly in for it. It's called Atomicon up in Newcastle. It's in June. So I'm going to be there. Unfortunately, I'm not speaking yet, but again, long-term play. I sponsored the event last year. I'll probably sponsor it again this year. Hopefully I'll be on the stage next year. So again, it's investing into those partnerships because I know how valuable it would be to be on that stage there. And it's quite nice that they actually refused to put me on the stage this year because they said I'm not ready for it. I was like, cool, I love that. What do you need to see then? Make me a better person. Let me get on, what have I got to do to get on the stage?
Right.
So those are the two big things sort of coming up in the not too distant future. What else would you like to know, Dorien? What would be helpful?
Do you have any other partnerships that you're pursuing, or is there any like actionable advice that you can leave us with? So wherever people are on their journey, let's start with a beginning podcaster. What is something they need to do right now?
So the key thing is don't be afraid to ask for what you want. I think a lot of people maybe struggle a little bit with imposter syndrome or think somehow that they're beneath the guests which they would love to get on their show. And you're really not. I was quite humbled. A good friend of mine, Dan Priestley, recently has just recorded for Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett, right? So it's one of the biggest podcasts universally, in the world. I was like, cool, that's so cool. For Dan, one of my friends, to get onto that podcast because it's such a big deal. But the nice thing is Dan posted everyone on social. And the nice thing is a couple of people in the comments put, hey, Rob, they tagged me into it. Hey, Rob, so when are you going to be on DOAC? Right. And I was like, oh, thank you. That's nice to get that recognition. And there was a part of me, which is the heart sort of starts pumping a bit. God, me and Steve Bartlett in a room, but equally, I'd be there because I deserve to be there. He's just also another human being, right? So people who are listening, don't be afraid just to put yourself out there and ask for what you want. Be intentional, be helpful, deliver tons of value, and you'll get some great guests onto your podcast if that's something which you want to do.
Okay. So as we end, how can people connect with you? Where are you on social? You didn't rant about social like you said you might. So where can people meet you on social? Where are you most active? And let's put it out there. What's the name of your book, Robin?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a shameless plug. So yeah, it's called Take Your Shot. So, and same as what I did for Ali, I've got copies for your listeners as well, Dorien. So they can go to fearless.biz/TYS. So for Take Your Shot. And it will be me hand signing it and posting it down with Pauline at the post office. But yeah, LinkedIn and Instagram are probably the best bets beyond that as well.
Okay. And if you missed that link, I'll make sure to put it in the show notes so you can connect with Robin. Robin, I am very much looking forward to seeing you in just a few months in Birmingham and be in the room with you. It's just amazing. And for those of you who got immense value out of this, connect with Robin. I'm sure there is more. I can't wait to request a book, Robin. I haven't read it yet. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening to Strategy Talks. And I'll be back next week with another episode. Bye, everybody.